All right, gang, I have a lot to talk about today. I am aware that some studios have opened and some people are teaching classes or attending classes in person. And I recognize that there are some challenges to doing that, just like there were challenges when we all first moved online and had to figure out how to do that. And then, there were some classes that were happening outdoors and we had to figure out how to do that. And now there are some that are happening in studios. So I'm going to address in studio classes in a time of COVID for yoga teachers, yoga therapists, and also yoga practitioners, yoga students. So bear with me while I pull up my notes because there's a lot to say about this and I want to make sure that I capture it all. Okay, so for teachers, one challenge is that you're probably going to have to demonstrate more. We have a tendency in Yoga for Arthritis to say, don't do the practice with your students. Let them feel the practice in their own bodies without feeling like they have to copy what it is that you're doing. Give them time to be in the experience themselves once they've gotten the instruction to do that. However, that would allow you to walk around the room as a teacher and observe what's happening with your students and make recommendations and maybe even give a little bit of hands-on guidance, give instruction to the whole room, make sure the people in the back can hear you. All of that is may not even be possible, okay? So it depends on your studio and what the studio's guidelines are. But certainly, I do not recommend that you be within 6 feet of your students. And so the whole idea of walking around the room and attending to various students is kind of out the window. So if you're going to be demonstrating more, you really want to be careful about how you do that. And as we teach in the level 1 training, be very aware of the hierarchy of modifications in a given pose so that you're offering not only language that puts it all on an even playing field, but you're demonstrating that in what you do yourself. So the more challenging versions of the pose, you may not even need to demonstrate at all because the people who can do them know them and can do them themselves. And certainly if you do demonstrate something more challenging, you can just show it for a moment so people who are interested know what to do, but hang out most of the time in the most accessible option so that the people for whom that is an appropriate choice feel included and not excluded and not like they're doing something wrong because it's different from what the instructor is demonstrating. I know you probably all do that anyway, but it bears repeating, especially now that demonstration is probably going to be a more essential tool in your teaching than ever. Additionally, your verbal instruction has to be super clear and articulate because you're with a mask on, not only is the sound muffled, but also the lip reading that normally happens so that people can understand what you're saying is unavailable. So it's not just people who are hard of hearing who figure out what you're saying by the shape of your mouth. We all do that. We use both the information that we're hearing and also what we're seeing in the movement of your mouth to be able to discern what you're saying. So it requires even more clarity and articulate speech in order to make sure that people are hearing, and especially if you're stuck at the front of the room and there are people who are spread out. I would encourage anyone who may have more difficulty hearing you to position themselves toward the front of the room, or perhaps you can turn so that your sound is directed toward those individuals who may have more trouble hearing you. Also, because you should not be offering any hands-on guidance or feedback, you're going to have to use your verbal explanation in place of that, or even more clearly, even more robust in terms of giving individualized recommendations. So the way that I usually do this in my teaching is that I'll offer general instruction. When I see that maybe somebody is doing something that isn't very safe, I'll say it to the whole class as a general instruction, like, Make sure that your knee is not going past your ankle. Take a look down, see where your knee is, observe the alignment between your knee and your ankle, etc. So I'll say that to the whole room. But if not everyone is getting that from the general instruction, maybe they don't recognize that it applies to them, then I can say, Sue, it looks like your knee is a little bit past your ankle. Just step your front foot forward a bit. There you go. Okay, so it's okay to give people individual verbal instruction that the whole room can hear if it's done kindly, if it's in an effort to keep them safe. And you might even say that at the beginning of class. I may give you some verbal direction that's personal to you in front of the class, and that's just because I can't move around the room and I want to make sure you're safe. Be aware of the hierarchy in pose modifications in the verbal language that you use as well. As those of you who have taken the training know, we don't talk about levels 1, 2, and 3 or beginner, intermediate, and advanced. They're just, you know, a buffet of options. You may find that you have more newbies, more beginners, more people who are what we call yoga naive in the research, because people are really looking for these tools now more than ever. So you want to be aware of people who are new to yoga and make sure that they feel safe and included and that they understand what they're doing, you know, as you would with a newbie in under any circumstances, but especially now when there are so many limitations. You're probably not going to be able to use props extensively, largely just because it's very difficult to keep them all sanitized. And so most studios are either saying no props or incredibly limited props. And so there are a couple of things you can do with that. What I like to do is just limit it to a folding chair. It's amazing what you can do with just a folding chair. I think that you can accommodate pretty much any set of limitations or movement challenges, contraindications with just that folding chair. So you might consider using folding chairs, because also if it's a metal folding chair, it's very easy to wipe down with some sort of a sanitized wipe, and then it's safe for the next person to use. So that's a consideration. Another option is to encourage people to bring props from home. You don't want to ask too much of people who have arthritis and are schlepping things. It's hard enough for them to get their own bodies to class, let alone a whole bunch of props. We do have the Yoga for Arthritis bag that fits a whole set of props in it that can make it easier for people to get their props to and from class. And I think that may be a featured product in this month's newsletter. So you can take a look at that and see if it might be beneficial for your students. So that's another option, is they bring their own props from home. And not everyone is going to have those. So you want to make sure that if you're offering some modifications like using blocks, for example, that you're able to provide instruction that keeps everybody else safe and in an appropriate version of the pose who doesn't have those props. Be aware also of the challenges to practicing in a mask, which if you're doing your practice in a mask at all, then you've experienced this, but you probably want to keep the pranayama gentle. Make sure that they're breathing, because people tend to restrict their breathing as it is, but especially if they have something over their nose and mouth, that may be even more likely. You certainly don't want to ask anything in the way of rapid breathing or anything that requires them to put their hands on their face, obviously, because we're trying to not put our hands on our face as a way to reduce the spread of this disease, so this infection. So gentle pranayama, not too much vinyasa, not too much movement that's going to elevate their heart rate and therefore elevate the rapidity of their breathing, and therefore maybe make them feel constrained in terms of their breath. So while normally I would recommend make sure that you get cardiovascular engagement, because it's so important to tone the cardiovascular system, they may want to do things that challenge their cardiovascular system outside or at home, you know, with a brisk walk around the block or running up and down the steps or getting on a stationary bike. and let the yoga class, because they're going to have a mask on, be a place where the movement is more gentle and requires less in terms of heavy, rapid breathing. Also encourage people to wash their masks after class, because you're breathing into it for a long period of time. You're likely sweating into it. And so we want to keep the masks sanitized as well, keep the masks clean for their sake. And there's even something now called a scent clip that I just recently read about. I have not tried it, so I can't endorse it, but it's a little clip that goes on the mask that you can put essential oils in. And so it could be a way to get some aromatherapy. I don't know how well that clip stays on when you're moving in all sorts of positions, but even if to put that on after class might be a nice touch, you know, put a little lavender on a mask clip on your way out the door. Okay. Also, of course, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because we're all incredibly challenged right now. It's a difficult time, no matter what your circumstances are. And if your cup is empty, then you will not be able to bring your best to your students, and therefore they will not be able to receive it and get the most benefit from it. So be sure that you're filling up your own cup. We all are being asked to adapt, adjust, and accommodate more than ever. So we also have to be really flexible from day to day, let alone month to month, because we may need to move back online after being in the studio. We may need to change safety protocols or change class sizes. And it also might make sense to offer your classes for people with arthritis, both in person and online, because there are plenty of people, especially those who are older, those who are higher risk, those who have immune conditions, who don't feel comfortable coming to the studio and are wise not to do so. And we want to make sure that the yoga that they have come to be able to experience online is still available to them too. So when we talk about access, we're talking about access for those who are staying at home as well. We want to keep yoga available to them too. I really do not recommend the version of hybrid teaching for yoga that is happening in other contexts, where you have some people in the room and you have some people who are online, only because with a yoga class, it's very difficult to attend to the needs of everybody in the room and also whatever is happening online. So I strongly suggest that a particular class be either in person or online and not both. Okay. I think that in classes, whether those are happening in person or otherwise, that it's important to bring your humanness. Obviously, fill your cup, do your own practice before you go into the yoga session so that you're able to be your best vessel for the work. But it's also important to acknowledge the challenges that we're all facing. We're all in this soup together, and we're doing our best to navigate it from the level of our own individual unique circumstances and challenges to our family life, what's happening in our communities, certainly what's going on in the nation, and even globally as this pandemic rages on. Don't lose sight of the importance of what we are offering. Whatever we have to do to make it available to the people that we serve, you can and should consider yourselves essential workers in this time, because we need this work as much as we need all of the other essential services that we've come to rely on. For yoga therapists, think about where you're offering your services to clients. Do you have a third space that is not your home and is not the client's home? And if so, can that be kept sanitized? Is there other traffic that moves through that space? And what can you do to ensure the safety of the client who is coming to you and also of yourself? If you see people in your home, what is the risk in your home? Who is in your home and what level of risk do they have? And what exposure is there? Do you have kids who are going to school? Do you have family members who are less responsible? And then what risk are you putting your client in by bringing them into your home? That being said, what precautions can you take to minimize that risk for the greatest benefit of the clients you work with? It's also important to consider what your own personal risk is when you're making the decision about whether or not to see people in person, and the risk of the particular clients you work with. Are they immune compromised? Are they older? Do they have comorbidities? Are they uncomfortable meeting with you in person? And what can you do in person from 6 feet away, you know, with your masks on, versus what you might be able to offer them virtually? What is the trade-off and the benefit of those alternate circumstances? If you generally see people in their homes, what's the risk in that home? What is the exposure there? And consider that when you're making the decision as well. If you're going to use props, which tend to be used pretty heavily in yoga therapy, does the individual client have their own personal props that they can use that aren't being touched by anybody else? Or if you are generally the one that supplies the props for the session, what kind of sanitizing protocols can you use? If you're using blankets, are you going to wash all of those blankets in between each client, which I would say would be absolutely necessary if you're going to reuse them. For students, practitioners, people who are practicing yoga, when you think about whether or not to come into the studio, one thing you should look at is the risk in your area, because we all live in different parts of the country or world, and the number of cases is different. The direction of the cases, the particular populations who are being hit by them. So look at the trends. Are the cases going up or down? How many cases are there where you live? And consider that in your choices about whether or not to go to an in-person class. What is your personal risk? Are you older age? Do you have multiple comorbidities? Are you on immune suppressing medications? Consider all of that when you're making decisions. And then, can you practice at home? Because obviously practicing at home is the safest option from an infection standpoint. Are you able to have a rich, meaningful experience practicing yoga in your own home, either live with an instructor, from a recording, with a manual, your own personal practice that you've developed over the years? Might it be beneficial to work with a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist just to develop a practice that you can use on your own, so you don't have to be in front of a screen when you're practicing, and you're able to just move through that sequence? So that's something to consider as well. I would say if you can meet your needs at home in terms of filling your cup with yoga, then I would certainly recommend doing that. And another important consideration in that regard is, do you have enough connection in your life? Whether you have people in your home or not, do you feel connected? Do you feel connected to friends and family? Are you feeling socially isolated, and that is not being addressed by the activities you're able to do online? Because we know that social isolation is bad for your health as well as risk and exposure are. When you think about your local studio, what are the safety precautions that that studio is taking? Do you feel like they are sufficient? Are you comfortable with what their plans are in terms of class size, in terms of waiting rooms, in terms of cleaning the spaces? All of those things should be looked at. And then, how adherent are people to the guidelines where you live? Because there are some communities where people are taking this very seriously, and other communities where they aren't. So if there are a lot of people who are not following the guidelines where you live, then that probably is also true of the people coming to the studio. And the more risks they're taking, the more they're putting you at risk if you're taking a class with them. And then also can ask about how adherent people are, or observe how adherent people are to the protocols in the studio itself. I see a lot of people who have their mask down under their nose so that it's only covering their mouth. And of course, the virus is airborne, and so it can still spread that way. Those kinds of things, you know, do you see people touching things, or, you know, are things being washed and cleaned sufficiently, etc. And then another important consideration is, if you're in class, and as you heard me say before, the teachers are limited in what they're able to do. They have a mask on, so you can't see their lips moving. They're speaking through a mask that muffles their voice. They probably have to stay at the front of the room. So you might think about, will I be able to hear the instruction? Will I be able to follow the instruction based on what I can see and hear, based on, you know, my own visual acuity and audio acuity? And if you do have challenges with either hearing or visually, then you may want to position yourself in the room to optimize your ability to understand the instruction, and even let the instructor know at the beginning of class that you have that challenge. And so the instructor can make an effort to ensure that the instruction is clear and in proximity to you. But if you do have challenges being able to hear or see the instruction, that's another thing to consider. And might it be better for you to be practicing online, where you can have the volume as loud as you need it, where you can expand, you know, zoom the screen as much as you need it, be as close to it as is necessary for you to be able to really get the full benefit of the instruction that's being offered. So I know that's a whole lot to think about, and I hope that it's useful. If you have any questions for me in particular as a yoga professional or a yoga practitioner about how do I do this thing, or, you know, what do you know about this, I'm happy to share my opinion. As you know, I am not a medical doctor, and nothing that I say can be considered as medical advice, but I am a public health doctor. And so from a public health perspective, I want to make sure that we are all being as safe as possible, taking care of our own physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual health, and doing the same for those in our lives and those we serve. So that all being said, I hope that you are all finding ways to practice, finding ways to offer and experience yoga, because if we ever needed it, we need it now. So thank you very much.